The laughter came first, soft, dismissive, the kind that wasn't meant to be heard, but always was. It spread across the room like smoke, curling through crystal glasses and designer perfumes, bouncing off marble floors and gold-trimmed walls, the kind of place where power sat comfortably, and judgment came instantly. She stood near the entrance, alone, a black woman, in a simple, elegant dress, nothing loud, nothing flashy. But in a room where status screamed through brands and diamonds, simplicity looked like weakness, and weakness was always noticed. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The voice came from behind her, smooth, polished, but sharp enough to cut. She turned slowly. A man in a tailored suit stood there, holding a glass of champagne, like it was part of his identity. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Private event," he added. "Invitation only." A few nearby guests glanced over. Then came the looks, measured, curious, dismissive. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes moved across the room, calm, observant, taking everything in. The lighting, the exits, the people, like she wasn't out of place, like she was studying it. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said quietly. That only made it worse. A woman nearby let out a short laugh. "Oh, this should be interesting. More attention now. More eyes." Someone whispered something. Another chuckled. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound polite, but not enough to hide the insult. "Listen," he said, "I don't want to embarrass you, but security can handle this if needed." And there it was. Not a question, a decision, already made. The room had judged her before she even spoke, before they knew anything, before they even tried. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. Then she smiled, not wide, not nervous, just enough to change something, something subtle, something dangerous. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "Call them." The confidence hit differently. It didn't match the situation, didn't match their assumptions. And for the first time, there was hesitation, just a flicker, but it was there. The man's smile tightened. Security was already moving, too. Large guards approaching from across the room. Slow, certain. Like this was routine, like she wasn't the first. The whispers grew louder. Now, phones subtly raised. People watching, waiting, because moments like this, they were entertainment until they weren't. She didn't move, didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She just stood there, calm, still, watching them walk toward her like she already knew how this was going to end. And that was the part no one understood yet. Because, in less than 60 seconds, this entire room was going to change.
The guards didn't rush. They never do in places like this. Because power here moves slowly, confidently, like it has nothing to prove. And as they approached her, the room subtly shifted to make space, conversations lowering into murmurs, heads turning just enough to watch without seeming obvious, because everyone wanted to see how this would end. Everyone expected the same outcome, the same quiet removal, the same unspoken confirmation of who belonged and who didn't. And the man in the tailored suit stepped slightly to the side, giving the guards a clear path, as if he had already finished his part. His expression composed but tightened at the edges, because something about her calm hadn't sat right with him. Not fully, not completely. And still she didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't offer explanation or apology. She just stood there with that same quiet presence that now felt less like uncertainty and more like control. And when the guards finally reached her, one of them spoke in a low professional tone, the kind that tries to sound respectful while carrying authority. "Mom, we're going to need you to come with us." And for a moment nothing happened, the room holding its breath just slightly, waiting for resistance, for emotion, for anything that would justify what was happening. But she simply looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something steadier, something measured. And then she nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if she had been expecting this exact line, this exact moment. And that alone created a ripple of discomfort that spread quietly through the nearest watchers. Because people who don't belong usually react. They explain, they defend, they try to prove themselves. But she wasn't doing any of that. And the guard gestured politely toward the exit. "This way," he said, and she turned without hesitation, Her heels soft against the polished floor as she began to walk. Not escorted, not dragged, just moving on her own terms. And for a few seconds, it looked exactly like what everyone expected. A quiet removal, a closed moment, something that would be forgotten by the end of the night. But then it happened, not loud, not dramatic, just a small interruption that didn't belong in the rhythm of the room. "Wait," a voice called out, and it cut through everything with just enough clarity to stop the guards mid-step. And she stopped too, not turning immediately, just pausing, because she already knew that voice, and slowly she turned back, her eyes moving across the room until they landed on a woman near the center. Older, composed, someone who carried a different kind of presence than the rest, quieter but heavier, the kind of presence that didn't need attention to be powerful. And the room shifted again, more noticeably this time, because people recognized her, maybe not by name but by influence, and the guards hesitated, looking between her and the man who had initiated everything, unsure of who held the higher authority in that moment. And the woman stepped forward slightly, her gaze fixed on the one being escorted, studying her in a way that wasn't dismissive but searching, like she was trying to place something just out of reach. "Have we met?" she asked, and it wasn't a challenge. It wasn't accusation, it was genuine but careful. And for the first time, the woman in the simple dress smiled a little more fully. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough to shift the energy again. "Not formally," she replied, her voice steady, clear, carrying easily across the room without needing to rise. And the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't filled with judgment or expectation. It was filled with something else now, something closer to uncertainty, because this wasn't how these situations usually unfolded. There wasn't supposed to be a second look, a second question. And the man in the tailored suit stepped forward again, trying to reclaim control, his tone still polite but sharper now. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "She doesn't have an invitation." And the older woman didn't look at him immediately, her attention still on the one being escorted. "Is that true?" she asked. And there it was, the question that should have come first but didn't, the one that had been skipped entirely until now. And the room leaned into it without realizing, waiting, watching, because the answer suddenly mattered in a way it hadn't a moment ago. And the woman glanced briefly at the guards before looking back, her expression unchanged. "No," she said simply, and the word landed clean, direct, undeniable, and the man exhaled through his nose slightly, as if relieved, as if the situation had corrected itself. "There we go," he said almost under his breath. "That settles it." But the older woman's expression didn't change, didn't soften, didn't resolve because she hadn't finished, and she turned her head slowly toward him, her gaze sharpening just enough to quiet him without effort. "Then why are you here?" she asked, redirecting the question. And this time the woman in the simple dress didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch, let the room sit in it, feel it, question it. And when she finally spoke, her voice was just as calm as before, but carried something heavier now, something that shifted the balance in a way no one expected. "Because I allowed this event to happen," she said. And for a split second nothing moved. Nothing reacted because the sentence didn't fit. It didn't align with the assumptions that had already been made. And then the confusion began, subtle at first, a glance here, a frown there, the kind of quiet recalculation that spreads before realization hits. And the man let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" he said, but his voice had changed just slightly, just enough to betray that flicker of doubt he hadn't fully controlled. And she looked at him then, directly, fully, her gaze steady and unshaken. "This venue," she continued, "this event, the contracts behind it, the funding that made it possible." She paused just long enough to let the words settle. "That would be me." And this time the silence wasn't uncertainty. It was impact, sharp and immediate, cutting through the room in a way no one could ignore. And the guards stepped back instinctively. Not because they were told to, but because something in the authority had shifted. Something unspoken but undeniable. And the older woman's eyes widened just slightly, recognition finally clicking into place, and the man's expression changed completely, the confidence draining from it as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something rawer, something closer to realization. And suddenly every look in the room felt different. No longer dismissive, no longer entertained, now sharp, alert, aware, because the situation hadn't just changed. It had flipped entirely. And the woman who had been seconds away from being escorted out now stood at the center of it all, not elevated by volume or force, but by truth, by control, by something that had been there from the beginning, whether anyone recognized it or not. And she didn't raise her voice, didn't demand attention. She didn't need to, because she already had it completely. And the only thing left now wasn't whether she belonged. It was what she was going to do with the power she had just revealed.
The silence didn't just stay in the room, it tightened. Like something invisible had wrapped itself around every person standing there, squeezing slowly as realization began to creep in. Not all at once, but in fragments, in glances, in the way conversations died mid-sentence and never recovered, because something was wrong now. Something didn't match what they had assumed just seconds ago. And Hayes felt it first, not fully understanding it, but sensing it slipping through his control like sand through his fingers. His confidence cracking at the edges as he forced a small laugh that didn't land. "That's not possible," he said, but even he could hear the weakness in his own voice, could feel how it didn't carry the authority it had moments ago, and she didn't rush to correct him, didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, letting the room react for her, letting the weight of her words spread on its own, and that made it worse, because now people were thinking, questioning, recalculating everything they had just witnessed. And the guards, who had arrived with certainty, now hesitated without being told to, their posture shifting subtly, their authority dissolving in real time as they glanced between her and Hayes, unsure of who they were supposed to follow anymore. And that uncertainty was enough to trigger something deeper in the room, something uncomfortable, because power had just changed direction, and everyone felt it, even if they didn't want to admit it. And then the older woman stepped forward, calm but sharp, her eyes locked onto the woman in front of her like she was searching through memory, through something half recognized. "Your name," she said, steady and direct. "What is your name?" And suddenly that question carried weight, because names meant everything here. Names separated those who belonged from those who didn't. Names unlocked doors, and for the first time since she walked in, the woman gave them hers without hesitation, without build-up, without performance. "Amara Cole," she said, and it didn't explode. It didn't shock the room instantly, but it moved through it like a current, subtle at first, then faster, sharper, until it reached the people who understood what that name meant. And you could see it happen. Someone straightening suddenly. Someone turning fully now, no longer pretending not to care. And the older woman's expression shifted first, just enough to confirm recognition. "Cole," she repeated quietly, and that was the moment everything tilted. Because now it wasn't just a claim, it was confirmation. And Hayes felt it hit him like a delay, his mind catching up too late, his posture stiffening as he tried to recover ground that was already gone. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly, too quickly, like he was trying to stop something before it fully formed. But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. They were watching her, and she tilted her head slightly, calm, composed, almost curious. "You're right," she said, and for a split second relief flashed across his face, thin and desperate, until she finished the sentence. "There is a misunderstanding," and the way she said it stripped that relief away instantly, because now it wasn't a correction in his favor, it was a correction against him. "You assumed I needed permission to be here," she added. And that was it. That was the line that cut clean through everything. Because it didn't accuse loudly, it exposed quietly. And quiet exposure is harder to fight, harder to deny. And the older woman stepped in again, her tone no longer neutral but decisive. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I think you should take a moment." And it wasn't advice. It was a shift in authority, clear and undeniable. And Hayes felt it. Everyone did. The way control slipped from him completely without force, without argument, just taken. And he tried to hold on to something, anything. "I was just doing my job," he said, but now it sounded small, like an excuse even he didn't believe anymore. And Amara stepped forward, slow, precise, every movement pulling attention tighter around her. "Your job," she repeated softly, not mocking, just questioning. And that question carried more weight than anger ever could, because it forced him to define something he had never needed to explain before. And he couldn't, not without exposing himself further. And she closed the distance just enough to shift the balance completely. "Is your job to decide who belongs?" she asked. And the room felt that, deeply, because everyone knew the answer, even if no one said it. And Hayes opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because anything he said would only confirm it. And Amara held his gaze, steady, unshaken. "You saw me walk in," she continued, her voice calm but cutting through the silence. "And you made a decision," and there was no emotion in her tone, no anger, just fact, and facts are harder to escape. And behind them, the room had gone completely still again, but not out of curiosity this time, out of awareness, because now they understood. They weren't watching a situation unfold, they were part of it, every single one of them. And that realization settled heavier than anything else, because it meant this wasn't just about what he did. It was about what they allowed, what they ignored, what they chose not to question. And suddenly the energy in the room shifted from observation to accountability, and no one knew where to stand anymore. The shift didn't feel loud, but it felt permanent, like something invisible had snapped into place and locked the entire room into a new reality, where nothing could go back to how it was just minutes ago, because now it wasn't about a misunderstanding or a mistake anymore. It was about truth standing in the center of the room where everyone could see it, and Amara didn't move right away, didn't rush to speak. She let that weight settle, let it press down on every person who had watched, who had judged, who had stayed silent, and that silence now felt different, heavier, almost accusing, because it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they hadn't questioned. And when she finally spoke, her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the room, clean and direct. "I want something simple," she said, and that word simple landed with tension, because nothing about this felt simple anymore. "Honesty," she added, and you could see the reaction immediately. Subtle but real, shoulders tightening, eyes shifting. People avoiding contact like honesty had suddenly become the most dangerous thing in the room, and her gaze moved slowly across them, not rushing, not missing anyone, reading them in a way that made it feel like she already knew the answers. "Who here thought I didn't belong?" she asked. And the question didn't echo, but it hit, because it was direct to direct, stripping away all the comfort of silence. And no one answered. Of course they didn't, because now that thought, that instinct, that judgment was exposed, and admitting it would mean owning it. And ownership is something people avoid when consequences are standing right in front of them. And Amara nodded slightly like she expected that, like their silence confirmed more than any answer could. "Interesting," she said quietly. And then she took one step forward, just one, but it tightened the entire room again, because now it felt closer, more personal, harder to escape. "Let me make it easier," she continued, her tone still calm but sharper now. Who here said nothing? And that question hit deeper, because silence is harder to defend than action. Silence means watching, agreeing without speaking, allowing something to happen while pretending you're not part of it. And suddenly, people shifted more visibly. Someone looked down, someone crossed their arms. Someone took a step back, like distance could remove them from what had already happened. And the older woman watched carefully, her expression focused now, understanding that this wasn't just confrontation. This was exposure of something much bigger, and Hayes tried to step back into the moment, tried to grab control before it slipped further. "There's no need to make this bigger than it is," he said. But his voice didn't carry anymore. It didn't land the way it used to, because the room wasn't with him now, it had moved. And Amara didn't even look at him at first. And that was worse than any direct response. Being ignored when you're trying to regain power only confirms that it's already gone. "It's already bigger," she said, finally turning toward him. And those 4 words closed the space he was trying to create, because they made it clear there was no going back to a smaller version of what this was. And she stepped closer again, steady, controlled, her presence now dominating the space without force. "Because what happened here wasn't just about me," she continued, and that line shifted everything again. Because now the room understood they were included in this, whether they wanted to be or not. It was about assumption, she said, each word placed carefully, about bias, a pause, just long enough for it to sink in, about deciding someone's place without knowing anything about them. And now the silence turned sharp, because no one could deny that. No one could reshape it into something safer, and Hayes tried again. But now, it sounded like defense, not authority. "I was maintaining standards," he said, and even he heard how weak it sounded. How empty, and Amara repeated the word slowly. Standards, like she was testing it, weighing it, exposing it. And then she stepped right in front of him, close enough that the difference between them wasn't physical anymore. It was control. And what exactly do those look like? She asked. And there was no anger, no raised voice, just a question that demanded an answer he didn't have, because any answer would reveal too much, and he stayed silent. Because silence was safer than truth now. And she held his gaze for a second longer, before turning back to the room, expanding the moment again, making it bigger than him, bigger than one interaction. This is how it works, she said, her voice steady, carrying across every corner of the space, not loudly, not obviously, and people listened now, really listened. Because this wasn't just a situation anymore. It was a reflection, quiet decisions, quick judgments, small actions that feel normal, she continued, and you could feel it hitting them, one by one, because they had all done it, seen it, allowed it, but they're not, she finished. And that line landed deeper than anything else, because it stripped away the excuse of normal. And now there was nowhere left to hide, and she let the silence sit again. Longer this time, heavier, until it became uncomfortable, until it forced awareness into every corner of the room. And then she spoke again, softer but sharper. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, she said, built on trust, partnership, shared vision, and her eyes moved across them again, slower now, more deliberate. But what I saw the moment I walked in, she paused briefly, just enough to shift the tension, was something else, and no one moved, no one spoke, because they knew exactly what she meant, without her having to say it directly. And the older woman stepped forward slightly then, her voice calm but decisive, acknowledging what had already shifted. What would you like to happen next? She asked. And that question carried power, because it handed control fully to Amara, without hesitation, without doubt. And for the first time there was a slight change in Amara's expression. Not emotion, but decision. Something settling into place. I want accountability, she said. And the word landed like a final marker, clear, unavoidable. And Hayes felt it hit him harder than anything else had so far. His posture tightening as he tried one last time. Let's not overreact, he said. But it didn't work. It didn't move anyone. Because the room had already crossed a line where this could be minimized. And Amara looked at him, steady, calm, completely in control. This isn't an overreaction, she said. A slight pause, just enough to let the truth breathe. It's a correction, and that was the moment everyone understood something clearly. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a shift, a reset, something that was about to leave consequences behind, real ones. And the only question left now wasn't whether she had control. It was how far she was willing to take it.
The word correction didn't echo out loud, but it landed like a final decision already made, and the room felt it instantly. That quiet, undeniable shift, where no one was pretending anymore, no one was watching for entertainment, because this had crossed into something real, something that carried consequences, and Amara didn't rush into the next moment. She let it breathe. Let the tension stretch just long enough to make everyone feel it fully, because discomfort forces attention, and attention is where truth settles deepest. And Hayes tried to rebuild himself again, straightening his jacket, adjusting his posture, clinging to the version of authority he had just lost. We can resolve this professionally, he said, but his voice didn't carry the same weight. It sounded thinner now, like something hollow trying to sound solid. There's no need to escalate. And Amara's eyes shifted toward him slowly, calm, controlled, and that calm was what made it sharp. Escalate? She repeated softly, taking a single step forward that immediately pulled all attention back to her. Because now every movement mattered, every word mattered. Do you think this is escalation? She continued, her voice still low, still steady, but cutting clean through the air. This is exposure. And that word changed everything again, because escalation can be debated, argued, denied, but exposure cannot. Exposure reveals what already exists, and once it's seen, it cannot be unseen. And you could feel the room react to that. Subtle but immediate, shoulders tightening, eyes shifting faster now because people understood what that meant. This wasn't about a moment anymore. It was about truth being brought into the open, and Amara turned slightly, widening the focus again, pulling the entire room into it. You all saw what happened, she said, and no one denied it, no one could. because they had been there watching, participating in their silence. And she didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. And yet no one stopped it, she added. And that landed deeper, because now it wasn't just about Hayes. It was about everyone who stood still, everyone who chose comfort over question. And a man near the back shifted, unable to hold it in. "We didn't know," he said quickly, his voice uncertain, searching for an excuse that might still work. "We didn't realize," and Amara looked directly at him. Not harsh, not aggressive, but precise. "You didn't need to realize," she said. A small pause, just enough to let the words settle. "You just needed to question." And that shut him down immediately, because it stripped away the only defense he had. And now the room felt smaller, tighter, like there was nowhere left to step back to, nowhere to hide inside comfort. And Amara moved again, stepping into the center fully, owning the space completely now without forcing it. "Let's be clear," she said, her tone steady, controlled, undeniable. This wasn't a mistake, and the way she said it removed any chance of softening what had happened. This was a choice, she added, and each word that followed felt heavier than the last, made quickly, made confidently, made without hesitation, and that repetition built pressure, because it mirrored exactly what had happened, exactly how easily the decision had been made about her. And she turned back to Hayes again, closing the loop, bringing it right back to where it started. "And now," she said, her voice slightly lower, more focused, "we deal with it." And Hayes swallowed visibly now, because he felt the direction this was going, even if he didn't want to accept it. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. But there was no strength behind it, no control, just a question from someone who already knew he had lost it. And Amara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her hand, lifting something small, something simple, a phone. And for a moment it didn't look like much, just an object, ordinary, forgettable, but the way she held it changed that, because there was intention behind it, and intention always signals impact. "I believe in clarity," she said calmly, and then she tapped the screen once. A small action, quiet, almost insignificant, but what followed wasn't, because she turned the screen outward, facing the room. And at first people didn't react. They didn't understand what they were looking at, but then recognition hit, sharp and immediate, because the screen showed the entrance, the exact moment everything began. Hayes approaching her, the laughter, the comments, the guards being called, every detail captured, every second preserved, and the reaction moved through the room like a shockwave, not loud but fast, eyes widening, bodies stiffening, because now it wasn't memory, it wasn't interpretation. It was proof, undeniable and complete, and Hayes felt it instantly, his expression tightening as something close to panic broke through his control. "You recorded this?" he said, and for the first time there was real fear in his voice, not of her, but of what this meant. And Amara met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," she said, and that single word carried more power than anything else in the moment, because it confirmed everything. No escape, no rewriting, no denial. And he tried to respond. "You can't just—" But the sentence fell apart, because he knew he had no ground to stand on. No argument that would erase what was now visible to everyone. And Amara stepped closer again, calm, steady, completely in control of the moment. "This is what accountability looks like," she said quietly. And then she turned slightly, addressing the room again, expanding it beyond him once more. "Not opinions," a pause. "Not assumptions," another pause, "evidence." And that word landed hardest, because evidence doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't need agreement, it simply shows, and what it showed was enough, more than enough. And the older woman stepped forward now, her tone formal, decisive, the kind that signals finality. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I think it's best you step outside." And there was no hesitation in her voice, no room for argument, and Hayes looked around one last time, searching for support, for someone to stand with him. But the room had already moved on. They weren't with him anymore. They were watching him, measuring him, and that was worse than rejection, because it meant he had lost position completely. And his jaw tightened as he turned, walking toward the exit on his own. Not forced, not dragged, but removed all the same. And the moment he crossed the door, the energy in the room shifted again, lighter but sharper, because now everyone understood something clearly. This wasn't just a moment that would pass. It was something that would stay. Something that had changed the balance in a way they couldn't ignore, and Amara lowered her phone slowly. Her expression still calm, still controlled. Her presence still dominating the space without effort. "This isn't about one person," she said, her eyes moving across the room again. Slower now, more deliberate. It never was. And the way she said it made one thing clear. What was coming next would reach further than anyone in that room was ready for. The moment Hayes disappeared beyond the door, the room didn't relax. It reset, like something invisible had been cleared out, but replaced with something heavier, something sharper, and every person standing there felt it. Because now there was no distraction, no focal point to blame or watch. Now the attention had nowhere to go except back to her, and Amara stood exactly where she had been, calm still, completely in control without raising her voice or demanding it. And that control was what made the silence stretch longer than anyone expected, because no one knew what she would do next, and that uncertainty carried more pressure than anything that had already happened. And she let it build, let it sit until it became impossible to ignore. Then she moved, slow, deliberate, stepping toward the center of the room again like she was taking ownership of something that had always been hers. And every eye followed, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of awareness, because now they understood who she was, what she controlled, what she could do, and that changed everything. "You're all wondering what happens next," she said calmly, her voice cutting clean through the silence without needing volume. And no one answered, but the truth of that statement sat in every expression, every still posture, because they were wondering, all of them, not just about the situation, but about themselves, about where they stood in it. And Amara's gaze moved slowly across them, not rushed, not missing anyone, like she was reading them again, but this time with full clarity. "Some of you think this ends with him," she continued, and a few people shifted subtly, because that had been their hope, their quiet assumption that removing Hayes had solved the problem, that the moment was contained, controlled, finished, and she shook her head slightly. "Almost imperceptible, it doesn't," she said, and that word landed with finality, because it removed the illusion of safety they had just started to rebuild. And now the tension returned, stronger than before, because this wasn't closing, it was expanding, and she took another step closer to them, closer to the truth they couldn't avoid. "Because what happened here," she said, her tone steady, precise, "wasn't created by one person, and that shifted everything again, because now the focus widened beyond Hayes completely. Now it included the room, their silence, their reactions, their decisions. It was allowed," she added, and that word hit deeper than accusation, because allowance is quiet, invisible, easy to ignore until someone points directly at it. And now it had been pointed at clearly, undeniably, and no one could step away from it anymore. And she paused, letting that sink in fully, letting the discomfort reach the point where it couldn't be dismissed. Then she lifted her phone again slightly, not to show it, just to remind them it existed, that everything they had done was no longer just a moment. It was a record, a truth that could move beyond this room. "This footage," she said, her voice calm but carrying weight now, "doesn't just show what he did," a small pause, "it shows all of you." And that was it. That was the line that changed the entire atmosphere completely, because now it wasn't about witnessing anymore. It was about being seen, being part of something that could follow them, define them, expose them, and you could feel it instantly, the shift from discomfort to concern, real concern, because now consequences weren't abstract anymore, they were possible, real, close. And the older woman stepped forward slightly, her expression serious now, fully aligned with the gravity of the moment. "What are you planning to do with it?" she asked. And that question carried weight, not resistance, not challenge, but recognition of what was now in Amara's hands. And Amara looked at her briefly, then back to the room, letting the question hang just long enough to build tension, to make them feel the importance of the answer before she gave it. "That depends," she said quietly, and the uncertainty in that answer hit harder than any immediate decision would have, because now they were waiting, hoping, questioning what direction she would take. And she stepped forward one final time, stopping where everyone could see her clearly. No barriers, no distance, just presence. "On whether this was just a moment," she continued, "or a reflection," and that word carried depth, because it forced them to think beyond the situation, beyond the event, into something bigger, something ongoing, something real. And her eyes moved across them one last time, slower now, more deliberate than ever, holding each gaze just long enough to make it personal. Because if it's a reflection, she added, then this doesn't stay here. And that was the pressure point, the moment where everything balanced on what came next. And the room held its breath without realizing it, waiting, completely locked into her decision. And then she did something unexpected, something that shifted the tension again, but in a different direction. She lowered the phone, not hiding it, not dismissing it, just lowering it. And the movement itself carried meaning, because it showed control, choice, intention, and her voice softened slightly, not weaker, just clearer, more focused. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," she said, and that line released a fraction of the tension in the room, just enough to make them listen even closer. "I came here to see something," she continued, "and I saw it." And that statement landed with quiet finality because it meant the test, whether they realized it or not, had already happened, and they had already revealed themselves. And she let that sit for a second before finishing. "What happens next," she said, "is up to what you do after this moment." And that shifted the responsibility completely, placing it back on them, not as spectators but as participants in what comes next. And no one spoke, no one moved, because they understood now. This wasn't just about being exposed, it was about being changed, being forced to confront something they had ignored. And Amara turned slightly. No dramatic exit, no final gesture, just a controlled movement as she began to walk away, her presence still commanding, even as she moved toward the edge of the room. And no one stopped her this time. No one questioned her, because now they knew exactly who she was, and more importantly, they understood what they had been. And as she reached the doorway, she paused briefly, not turning fully, just enough to leave them with one final line, quiet but sharp. "Next time," she said, "ask first." And then she walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who would never look at a moment like that the same way again, because now they knew silence wasn't neutral, and assumption wasn't harmless, and power doesn't always announce itself before it changes everything.